Morning, everyone. Today's show is going to look at three main things. Yesterday, I was going to touch on Bill 195. So today, I'm going to look at Bill 195. It passed yesterday in Ontario, and there's some fallout from that I want you to know about. The other two things are going to be Justin Trudeau and COVID, and Justin Trudeau and we. And the last thing, I guess four main things. And the last thing is, I think a distraction is Miss Payette and some fallout from her office. So that's what we're doing today. First, though, I wanted to highlight this. Mr. Gelati, I think that's how you say his name, is highlighted in the Muskoka Post here, and I wanted to read the article to you. So here we go. Ontario lawyer files lawsuit against feds, province, and CBC over COVID-19 measures and masks. Rocco Gelati recently discussed the upcoming lawsuit against members of the Canadian government, the CBC, as well as the topic of mandatory masking. Gelati is a constitutional lawyer in Ontario and has been practicing law for 31 years. He began his career with the Federal Department of Justice. During a July 17th interview with Amanda Forbes, he said he has filed a constitutional challenge in the Ontario Superior Court on behalf of his clients seeking declaratory and injunctive relief against COVID-19 measures. Gelati said that both the federal as well as provincial governments have, quote, effectively dispensed with Parliament and are ruling by royal decree, as it were, which is unconstitutional. He is especially concerned about Ontario's Bill 195, in which the government can implement executive orders on an ongoing basis with the extension of emergency measures possible for years to come. Gelati said this is, quote, unheard of. In the claim, and hold on, I'll show you what Gelati said after Bill 195 got passed. This is his tweet about it. He says, Bill 195 passed in Ontario. It belongs in 1930s in Europe. Should have been called the Return to Dictatorial Rule Act. It needs to and will be constitutionally challenged. And I said, how do you join a class action constitutional challenge? I would love to join that and this one. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to become a part of it. Anyway, in the claim, Gelati is named, back to the article, the Trudeau government, Ford's provincial government, and the mayor of Toronto, John Tory. Apart from the constitutional breaches which Gelati said are freedom of conscious association, freedom of belief, right to life, liberty, and security, your right against unreasonable search and seizure, for the closure of business in an arbitrary and irrational manner, for the right against arbitrary detention. When bylaw officers stop you and ask for your information, they are not allowed to ask, but also for the discriminatory way in which people with psychological and neurological disabilities have been left out in the cold. Gelati says another vulnerable group at the center of the COVID measure are seniors. They are suffering solitary confinement in their own residence. These long-term care facilities have turned into gulags. It's atrocious, he said. Gelati, his clients, and teams are seeking relief from COVID-19 measures that are being undertaken, as he says that measures as socially distancing, mandatory masks are neither scientifically nor medically based. Quote, the science community has an avalanche of evidence that says masks don't work. Up until now, Theresa Tam, the WHO, and the CDC said masks do not work to stop airborne aerosol viruses, and they actually do harm to people. And all of a sudden, after 4 months in the thick of the pandemic, during which time on public transit systems there was no social distancing, no masking, and all of a sudden everybody was required to wear a mask everywhere? Why? Because of polls indicating people have lost confidence in what leaders are telling them, and so the masking laws are a means of obedience, a potent prop to ensure obedience and compliance because people are not buying this, but the evidence is just not there. These measures are not medically or scientifically based, Gelati said. He notes that when BC Chief Public Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry was asked why BC has allowed a social circle of 50 as opposed to Ontario, where the circle was set at 10, Henry answered by saying that, quote, this is not scientifically based. We think 50 is a reasonable number that we can trace. This is not based on science. We're not following science here. These provisions infringe on the Charter of Rights, Gelati said. And I say a lot of this stuff in my show, and I wanted to show you that it's not just me saying this stuff. I'm not just making it up. There are people who have 31 years experience in law, constitutional law, that are saying this is an overreach, this is not good, we should be paying attention to this. Here is the National Post opinion. Ontario's semi-emergency COVID-19 bill is an attack on all of our rights. So this is an opinion piece. This is about the this is about the law, Bill 195, that passed yesterday. Why is the province of Ontario making emergency powers permanent while simultaneously declaring the emergency over? This power grab by the Premier is an unjustified violation of charter-protected rights, and citizens should be concerned. Bill 195, the Reopening Ontario, a Flexible Approach to COVID-19 Act, was introduced at Queen's Park on July 7th. The proposed legislation would end the state of emergency, which was declared on March 17th, but it would simultaneously continue a number of existing emergency orders. Under the proposed legislation, restrictions on the size of gatherings or orders that keep businesses closed and override collective agreements for the redeployment of workers are all extended and can even be amended. Orders allowing the sharing of personal health information and which allow for police to demand identification, carding, are also extended but cannot be amended. These orders no longer need to be renewed every 14 days and could remain in place until June 2022. While under a declared state of emergency, these limits to our charter-protected rights of mobility, privacy, free association, and free assembly are likely justified under the balancing test set out in Section 1 of the Charter. When in the midst of a pandemic, a government order stating that gatherings of more than 5 or 10 people are prohibited, or that collective agreements may be put aside in order to redeploy healthcare staff to long-term facilities, has a strong rationale. But once the government announces that the state of emergency has ended, so too does the justification for limiting our rights. Logically, emergency orders may only be made during an emergency. The conditions for which constitutes a state of emergency are high. It is defined under the Emergency Measures and Civil Protections Act, EMPCA, as a, quote, danger of major proportions that could result in serious harm to persons or substantial damage to property. A state of emergency also requires that the government normally available resources, including legislation, may not be reliable or may be insufficient. Once an emergency is declared, Cabinet has the power to make a wide range of orders and can even override and rewrite certain legislation on a temporary basis. It was through the declaration of an emergency that these extraordinary restrictions were all brought into place. If the Ontario government is now of the view that the province is no longer in a state of emergency, why are the orders that were issued under the emergency continuing? Why were the orders issued under the emergency continuing under Bill 195? The bill also removes other accountability measures that exist when the orders are issued under the EMCPA during a state of emergency. Under Bill 195, certain orders can be amended even though the emergency is over. Orders can be extended for 30-day periods rather than only 14 days. The Premier must table a report on the emergency Bill 195, but it does not need to be debated by the legislature, which it does under the EMCPA. Constitutional experts are concerned. Professor Ryan Alford of Lakehead's Bora Laskin Facility of Law has described the legislation as a power grab. Professor Alford elaborated, saying that any attempt by the government to argue that the current crisis can justify the infringement of fundamental rights 2 years later is bound to fail. The precedent this would create is horrendous. A hypothetical state of affairs should never be the basis for an actual substantial restriction of liberty. Yes, I totally agree. You should not be saying this could happen, so you have to stay in your homes locked up, like in solitary confinement. That is absolutely inappropriate. And I heard some stories. I was out with some friends yesterday, and it was good to see them. And I heard some stories about people in long-term care facilities that are literally like locked in their room, except for the time that they can go on a direct path outside to get some outside air. And some of those people have a private room, so they're by themselves. Some of them have 2 people to a room, and some have 4 to a room. But the 4 to a room were a problem because it made the infection spread among that population, that vulnerable population. For having the audacity, moving on a little bit, for having the audacity to vote against it, Cambridge MPP Belinda Carriolis, I think that's how you say that, is out of the Progressive Conservative Party. And Randy Hiller is saying there are now 12 independent, unrecognized members of the legislature, enough to form an independent caucus and be recognized. I think 8 of those are Liberals, though, but I have no idea. Or maybe not. I could be wrong. Anyway, regardless, he's speculating maybe we've got enough to create our own little independent caucus here and have some sway. 12 seats is not nothing. I don't know that it's balanced. I don't think it's balance of power, but I mean, it gives you a little bit of sway to have a coherent conversation. But I don't know if without a party uniting you, I don't know if you could realistically do that. Okay, moving into Andrew Scheer, Justin Trudeau, and the federal questions behind We and the money that Justin Trudeau's family got and benefited directly from the taxpayer money that was going to be given to We. Here's Andrew Scheer. He's got 36 seconds. There's a longer clip, and I'll include the link. It's 2 minutes. Andrew Scheer gives Justin Trudeau a chance to just kind of spout his rhetoric. Make no mistake, Justin Trudeau would not have answered any questions about this anyway, but Andrew Scheer just kind of lets him. He's like, he says, he seems like, oh, I'm so frustrated, I'm not even going to ask you a question. and Trudeau plays that. So I'm not going to play all of that. That's 2.5 minutes. It's too long. I'm already long today. But here we go.
So gross and disgusting that this Prime Minister keeps using the pandemic as an excuse for his corruption. The very first act that this Prime Minister did when the pandemic hit was try to give himself unprecedented power and eliminate the role of the opposition in Parliament. And now we know why, Mr. Speaker, because when they're pushing $300 billion worth of deficit out the door, they will stop and take the time to reward their friends. That is the essence of this Liberal Party under this Liberal Prime Minister. I don't even have a question, Mr. Speaker. It's just disgusting.
And so Trudeau gets up and says, we're working for all Canadians. And then Andrew gets up and says, oh yeah, working for all Canadians, like giving big bailouts to companies that are associated with your family, blah, 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 blah. So it's just a back and forth. You know, I think that it's interesting because I think that there are some legitimate complaints, legal complaints and otherwise complaints about the governance, etc., that could be articulated really well by the opposition. And it's frustrating that they're so frustrated that they're unable to articulate something that traps Trudeau, right? Like, if you're playing chess, you don't knock over the pieces, right? You play chess to win, right? So you try and maneuver your pieces into a position where they have to say something that's going to incriminate them. And I mean, I understand that Trudeau's got the deck stacked, right? So if Trudeau's not going to say something that's going to incriminate him, use the time to speak to your base and try to expand your appeal, right? And I don't know that this does that. But you know, at least there's some fire in his belly. You know what I didn't like though? The cadence. When you're speaking and when you have a point to make, you've got to kind of hit a cadence, and he misses the cadence twice. He starts out really well. If you listen to it again, I'm not going to listen to it again, but he starts out really well, and then he stumbles a little bit when they start banging the tables, and then he stumbles a little bit on the second half as well, and your ear tunes into that, and you miss kind of his point, right? So I don't know. That's just my own interpretation of watching it. It was both times I had to listen to it a few times because I was like, there's something weird there. There's something off, and it's just his cadence. And sometimes it matters how you say things. Sometimes it does. Here's a story that looks like a bombshell. It was posted on July 22nd. Today is July 22nd. But it's not a bombshell. We knew this in April. Here's the CBC News. Military Intelligence Unit briefs Saijan on COVID-19 risk on January 17th. Documents. It says a little-known medical unit within Canadian Forces Intelligence Command briefed Defense Minister Harjit Saijan about the COVID-19 crisis on January 17th, 2020, the government confirmed in documents presented to Parliament this week. The briefing from the Medical Intelligence Medint unit came 17 days after the World Health Organization, WHO, China country office was informed of cases of pneumonia with an unknown cause in Wuhan, China, Hubei province. And as soon as I read this, I was like, I've read this before. I read the report that was submitted to the parliamentarians or whatever. I read the intelligence. I don't know if I read the actual intelligence, but there was a report. It was made public. The senators were talking about it on April 11th. I talked about it in my show. What's the date here? Yeah, April 13th. So here's Senator Caucus, and here, just really quick.
Always rest with Cabinet. I'm concerned about your government's reliance solely on Public Health Agency and not on the expertise of our Military Medical Intelligence Unit, who sounded the alarm way back in January. This unit relies on information not only from the World Health Organization, but also on intelligence shared amongst our Five Eye allies, including the U.S., whose intelligence was warning of this outbreak as far back as November 2019. So my question, Minister, to you is, why did we rely on a body that appears only to be parroting the...
So he's talking about why are we focusing on this faulty intelligence? Why aren't we using the Medint intelligence we had back in January, which we were briefed on? I'm not sure he said that. Hold on. Okay, he did say it. Moving on. This is into the COVID stuff. This is the British Columbia government. They're moving into mandatory masking. And Andrew Lawton is highlighting this. It says the British Columbia government is encouraging you to use glory holes to prevent the spread of COVID-19. If you don't know what a glory hole is, don't Google it. Don't Google it. But here it is. Here it is. Wearing a face covering or mask, heavy breathing during sex can create more droplets that may transmit COVID-19. Use barriers like walls, example glory holes, that will allow for sexual contact but prevent close face-to-face contact. Is that really where you want the government to be? Like, is that Is that the level of involvement you want from the government? I mean, I certainly don't. I'm not interested in that. Here is Calgary is going to mandatory masks. There's a grand total of 1 COVID patient in all of Calgary's intensive care units. Mandatory face masks aren't about safety, it's about control. Mandatory masks debate in Calgary, but it is happening. Here is a doctor, Dr. Gould. There's a link to the full video if you're interested. Here are some things that you should be interested in hearing about, why we're seeing an increase in positive cases. And quickly before I show you this, here's the Toronto Public Health. This is a legit Toronto Public Health, blue check marked Toronto Public Health. Somebody said, I'd like to understand why you were instructing the media to record any death as a COVID death, even if the death was caused by unrelated conditions, reasons according to doctors. Toronto Public Health says, individuals who have died with COVID-19 but not as a result of COVID-19 are included in the case counts for COVID-19 deaths in Toronto. I said, that means all the stats are wrong. That's from Canada Poly, but that's me. And yeah, the stats are wrong. Here's Dr. Gould. This is worth it. Probably the whole thing is worth it, but here we go.
In your mind, take that word cases and throw it away and replace it with positive test result. That's what the media means when they're saying cases. The other thing that's very disturbing, I've heard from people all over the country, patients and doctors, that the amount of fraud going on is rampant. I didn't believe it the first, 10 times. I was very skeptical. I've heard this at least 20 or 30 times now about situations where patients are getting positive results, which is impossible. We know it's impossible because the patient signed up for the test but never actually got the test. So they'd sign up like at CVS, they'd go, but there's a long line. So they say, you know what, I'm not gonna wait, I'm not gonna do it. They go home, and then in a week they're notified they have a positive test result. I've had dozens of claims like that, dozens.
I've also heard people who got tested multiple times and tested positive, then tested positive again, maybe a few days later, and that counts as 2 cases into the same batch with everyone else.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you asked that. So patients are being tested multiple times. By the way, the amount of testing that's going on is huge, right? Because patients are just showing up and wanting it. But for example, everyone who comes into the hospital is tested. Patients in the hospital get tested multiple times. If you get tested multiple times, that counts. Every time you take the test, that's another positive result. So I personally had situations, a person's had 4 positive tests.
So I don't know, this is an American source. I don't know what extent that's happening here. I do know that if you are working in like long-term care homes or in any kind of facility with vulnerable population, and say you're like a manager, so you work at the head office, right? And you have to get tested before you go. And so if you're having multiple tests and they're negative, then you're contributing to those testing results as well. And so I don't know how many of these tests are tests for new people. I don't know how many of the tests that are happening are mandatory. So anybody in a long-term care home gets tested daily, right? Everybody in long-term care homes gets tested daily. So if people are being tested for this coronavirus, I don't know how legitimate the stats are if what the Toronto Public Health says is true of all public health across Ontario or all public health across Canada. Because how could you adequately measure something if you're just discounting the real cause of death and saying, well, that's COVID? It seems like a bad policy to me, right? It seems like a bad way to keep track of things, especially when you're talking about removing our rights and freedoms in the name of safety, right? But if you're attributing every death to COVID-19, how is that accurate? How is that true? How is that giving us a realistic representation of what's actually happening out there, right? Here's into we. That was a little bit of COVID. Back to we. The amount of money that we charity received from the federal government more than doubled after Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's Liberals were first elected in 2015. That's a Global News report. Moving into Huffington Post, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh calls on the Prime Minister to waive cabinet confidentiality and release all documents around the We Agreement. This is interesting because Trudeau set precedent with the Jody Wilson-Raybould thing, saying, I'm really, really transparent and all sorts of stuff, and I'll open up the cabinet confidentiality around this specific thing, and she can talk about it, Jody Wilson-Raybould. And that led to more smoke but no smoking gun. And now Mr. Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, is saying you should release all the documents. Now, he could back this up. He could say, hey, you should release all the documents or I'll bring the government down. But it doesn't look like he is, right? There's more Brian Lilly we stuff. Trudeau wants to deny reality on the WE fiasco, and this is more real estate, more looking at real estate stuff. And, well, hold on a second here. Yeah, the only really new information is that the testimony from Shugart yesterday, and I'm sure there's lots to go through with that, and I haven't had a chance to have a look at it. So sorry, I've not looked at the testimony from yesterday. And again, I'm sure there's lots to peel back on it. Here's the distractionary story. Julie Payette was always a bad pick for Governor General, and from the beginning, Trudeau used her to push his political agenda, something no prime minister should ever do. Here's a opinion piece from the National Post. Why is Payette lobbying foreign diplomats to support Canada's UN Security Council bid? Remember those heady days when we were bidding for a UN Security Council seat? Those expensive, heady days. Here is a thread by Brian Platt, and Brian Platt is Parliament Hill reporter for the National Post. And he said, here's a thread of stories that have come out during Julie Payette's 3-year tenure as Governor General. Not everything here is scandalous or her fault, but the sheer range of it is really something. And most of it points to the lack of thorough vetting before her appointment. So in 2011, and we've looked at this one, in July 18th, 2017, iPolitics, PMO has no comment on Julie Payette's expunged 2011 assault charge. This is 6 days after Payette's appointment is revealed. Okay. In July 29th, Toronto Star, future Governor General Payette involved in fatal collision months before assault charge in Maryland. August 21st, 2017, National Post. Julie Payette drops legal battle to seal public records of her divorce proceedings. Canadian Press, November 2nd, 2017, Payette's speech mocked people with religious beliefs, critics say. August 27th, 2018, Globe and Mail, Governor General Julie Payette delays move into Rideau Hall. This was the start of a drumbeat of stories about her trouble at Rideau Hall. September 12th, 2018, Globe and Mail, Governor General at odds with RCMP over security issues. September 19th, 2018, Winnipeg Free Press, Governor General's first year won't include a Manitoba visit. September 20th, 2018, Globe and Mail, Governor General's review of patronage activities leaves charities in limbo. September 22nd, 2018, inside Julie Payette's turbulent first year as Governor General. This was the ridiculously long story from me and another person based on confidential sources at Rideau Hall. So confidential sources always gets my spider sense tingling. I don't know about confidential sources. I don't like that so much. And I've said that before. I talk about it, and I'll show you. There's a few more stories we've got just before I'm done today, but confidential sources always makes me go, couldn't get anybody to go on the record for it, eh? That's a little suspect. CTV News, Governor General Payette addresses missteps. I don't pretend to be perfect. September 27, 2018, Julie Payette doesn't plan to preside over 2018 Governor General's History Awards ceremony. January 12, 2019, Julie Payette's first year as Governor General. Critics say turbulent. She says quite a ride. Payette won't be moving into Rideau Hall for now. In July 3rd of last year. July 4th, unhappy times at Rideau Hall about the fact that staff there were reporting a bad working environment. So this news is nothing new. Payette has created a toxic climate of harassment and verbal abuse at Rideau Hall, and that's the one I'm going to show you here. And I think this is a distraction, but I mean, there's been a long history of these stories, right? But weird. Governor General Payette has created a toxic climate of harassment and verbal abuse at Rideau Hall. Governor General Payette has created a toxic environment at Rideau Hall by verbally harassing employees to the point where some have been reduced to tears or have left the office altogether, sources tell CBC News. 4 members of Payette's communications team have departed during the pandemic's period alone. A 5th person is leaving this week, and another 2 have taken leaves of absence. It's just the latest wave of staff to quietly transfer out of the small office in response to mistreatment during Payette's mandate, multiple sources said. This has gone from being one of the most collegial and enjoyable work environments for many of the staff to being a house of horrors, said one government source. It's bullying and harassment at its worst. And some people were saying that Rideau Hall and Rideau Cottage were the same. They're not the same. They're different. This is Rideau Hall. This is Rideau Cottage. I wanted to check because I thought That's interesting if it's the same. And the last story for this morning is inquiry into Nova Scotia shooting necessary to dispel rumor, improve public policy senators. I tacked this one on because I think it's important. It's still in the news and we still don't have any answers. So 2 senators who have added their names to a letter calling for a public inquiry into the mass shootings in Nova Scotia earlier this year say a full examination of the facts is required to dispel rumors about the attack and prevent it from happening again. It screams for a very public, transparent process that examines all the issues surrounding violence against women, surrounding how someone could do this, why the police didn't notify as soon as possible and that this was happening, why there wasn't at the very least an Amber Alert, why there wasn't a notice that this man was impersonating a police officer as soon as they knew, said Senator Kim Payette told CBC News Power and Politics Monday. All of those questions need to be answered in large part so we can prevent those sorts of things from happening in the future, for sure. Nova Scotia senators sent letters to Public Safety Minister Bill Blair and Nova Scotia Justice Minister Mark Fury on June 7th and again on June 29th to ask them to join forces for a public inquiry. Pat and Senator Paul Simpsons signed the letter dated July 18th. So, and there's other questions to be answered, like how did he get a $475,000 Brinks payout? Isn't that usually used for RCMP informants? Why did he get access to that? Who gave him access to that? Why isn't that part of the news? So there's lots going on. There's a huge amount of stuff going on, and it seems like, do you remember those commercials where they had 2 paper towels and they would drip water on them and one would like disintegrate and the other would like stay strong and then it would say bounty? I feel like we're just dripping water on this paper towel thing that's gonna break at some point. We keep adding things on. And if Scott Bryson hadn't resigned, maybe this whole thing just wouldn't have happened. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com. Check out CanadaReport.co. Check out SpeakingMoistly.co. I should be recording today. And have a wonderful, wonderful day.